an angry response from protesters after a fiery speech from President Trump.
Inside the convention center, Mr. Trump blasted both of Arizona's Republican senators, threatened a government shutdown over his proposed border wall, and accused the media of misreporting his response to the violence in Charlottesville.
I spoke out forcefully against hatred, bigotry, and violence, and strongly condemned the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, and the KKK. When they talk, he didn't say it fast enough. He didn't do it on time. Why did it take a day? He must be a racist. It took a day. If I don't have social media, I probably would not be standing. And do you ever notice when I go on and I'll put like out a tweet or a couple of tweets, he's in a Twitter storm again. I don't do Twitter stuff. We are building a wall on the southern border, which is absolutely necessary. Now, the obstructionist Democrats would like us not to do it, but believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
All right, so just so people understand, when the president says that the press was misquoting him, he misquoted himself. He read from his statement,
right,
but he left out the words that he used when he originally read the statement, which
that bothered people so much.
On both sides.
Right, on many sides,
Exactly.
sides. Right, indeed. Well, I wouldn't call this a Twitter storm, but of course the president is tweeting this morning again. The president took to Twitter, writing, quote, "Phoenix crowd last night was amazing, a packed house. I love the great state of Arizona. Not a fan of Jeff Flake, weak on crime and border," which of course he alluded to in the speech. He did not use his name.
He did not want to use their names,
yes,
right. Let's bring in Ken Thomas. He's a White House reporter for the Associated Press. He joins us now from Washington. Ken, so much to get to. We'll get to Senator Flake in a moment, but let's begin with the president's rehashing of his response to the violence in Charlottesville, blaming the media for the negative fallout over his remarks. Does that defense still play well with his base?
It plays well with the base. It played well in the room. But what we've seen in the past, often the president will go for big applause lines in a rally, but there comes consequences with that. It reopened the storyline in Charlottesville that we've been seeing for the last week. It's a story that I think a lot of people advising the president, a lot of congressional Republicans would like to move on from. So there are always consequences here when the president goes into an extensive grievance session on the media, the coverage, and some of the issues that he's been criticized for.
And the media is a common target, a regular target of the president. But, you know, he kind of went almost a little bit further in this speech. He called members of the media sick, said they didn't love the country. Is this the strongest language that you've heard from the president directed at the press?
I think that's a good point, Anne Marie. It was very strong language. He has been obviously very critical of the reporters and the media covering him in the past. I was struck by this notion that he accused the media of trying to take away our heritage, trying to take away our history. I thought that was a new case that he had made, kind of creating a straw man, if you will, saying that the media is, out to get our history and our heritage. But again, it's rehashing, relitigating a lot of this criticism of the media that he's done in the past, which tends to distract him from driving an agenda in Congress, focusing on his speech in Afghanistan, building the case for that.
Yeah, Ken, I thought, the pivot to they're trying to take our culture away, I thought it started out as the media is always attacking me to actually what the media is doing is attacking you. That was how I saw that pivot.
Right, and it seems like what he's been trying to do is discredit the media for months and create this idea that they're not reporting on him accurately, so that if something very damaging comes out about Russia or any other issues, members of his base will simply not believe the stories that are being reported at the time. It's a way for him to perhaps insulate himself down the road.
Ken, I was struck by the fact that the president seemed to blame the media, as we've been saying, for what happened in Charlottesville, and that President Donald J. Trump was the victim of what went down in Charlottesville. He briefly, barely mentioned Heather Heyer. He didn't talk about those missing sailors that are still missing in Asia. He didn't talk about the 2 soldiers that were killed earlier in August in Afghanistan. All he talked about was Donald J. Trump is a victim of the media for what went down in Charlottesville. And that still, listening to the crowd, seemed to go well with him.
Yeah, he appeared fixated on it. I was struck, too, that, you know, this did not appear to be something that was in the teleprompter. He reached into his suit pocket, in his breast suit pocket, and took out some notes, and then went on this extensive, you know, grievance session on how his words have been covered. You know, it didn't seem to be something that his advisors wanted him to go on and on about.
Also, Ken, I don't know, you've been covering Washington for a lot longer than me. This sounded to me the first time that a president of the United States actually ever said that he was an elite. In one of his off-the-cuff remarks, he talked about, you know, people that have nice apartments, and he said something like, you know, I got a much nicer apartment, I went to better schools, and I live in the White House.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was odd as well. And think of the context here. You know, the Treasury Department has been dealing with the fallout of this Instagram post that the wife of Steve Mnuchin posted, in which she was, you know, talking about the types of clothing, designer clothing that she was wearing during a flight to Kentucky. Then she got into an extensive back and forth with someone who responded to her on Instagram and then had to apologize for it. It just doesn't seem like the argument, the case that you want to make, especially at a rally, you know, in which your base is watching.
You brought up all the work that actually needs to be done. We're looking at a budget, we're looking at tax reform. And so one more sort of surprising thing that we heard from the speech last night, the president attacked Arizona's Republican senators. He did not say Jeff Flake and John McCain, though he mentioned Jeff Flake in his tweet, but we knew who he was talking about. It seemed like an odd thing to do. What do you know about the dynamic between the president and Congress at this point in time?
There's a lot of tension right now. I mean, the New York Times had a pretty explosive story a few hours before the rally, in which it reported that Mitch McConnell and the president haven't talked in weeks. When they last talked, they had a pretty you know, profound laced conversation. There seems to be a lot of bad blood. And then when you mention McCain and Flake, it just speaks to this undercurrent of tensions between Trump and some members of the Senate Republican caucus. You know, they're going to need Flake's vote. You know, he's going to be in Nevada today. He needs the vote of that senator as well. And the problem is, when you start picking fights with members of your own party, it becomes difficult to get the votes to get your agenda through. And they've got a lot that they need to accomplish next month. They've got the debt ceiling vote coming up. They need to keep the government funding going. He's going to want to try to get something done on the border wall, some money for that. And it's hard to accomplish those things when you're attacking members of your own party.
Yeah, and we've spent most of this discussion talking about the bullying that the president did from the podium yesterday to the press, to the media, to the senators in that state. But as you point out, there are a lot of serious issues that will affect the American people, and the president signaled a potential government shutdown over the border wall. So based on your reporting, Ken, how committed is the president in following through on that threat?
I think it's a fight that he wants to have. The question is, does he have the fight before September 30th, or is it something that, you know, they deal with later in the year? That, you know, we expect another fight over spending bills later on. But, you know, the thing that's pushing back against him is that I don't think John Kelly, his new chief of staff, wants to have this fight. I don't think they want to shut down the government over funding for the wall. You know, Republican leaders in the House and Senate certainly don't want to have this kind of fight. They've signaled that they want a clean debt ceiling vote. So I think, you know, it's possible they could get some additional funds before September 30th that might placate the president to a certain extent. But I think he does eventually want to have this fight.
Ken Thomas of the Associated Press, thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks.